The topic of discussion today is suicide. Is the topic of discussion today. One of the issue about suicide in our society today is that it kind of like give us what they call a major problem. So I wanted to really address this issue about suicide because a lot of people don't know that it's a bondage that comes from it's a bondage that actually comes from the spirit world, from heaven. And what happens is that you've got spirits of the dead that actually uses this concept, this ideology to make slaves of people. What they do is they inspire humans to commit suicide, and then they use them for their labor in heaven. And I'm just gonna go into the OahspeCollegeUniversity for a minute and kind of like explain to you how this came about. Usually when there's darkness in our world, you've got spirits of darkness, angels of darkness, or low-graded angels come to inspire humans to commit suicide. And if you look at our world today, if you look at our society today, to be honest with you, it's bad. You've got people committing suicides all over the world. Even in America, they commit suicide every day. But who make them commit the suicide? Who tell them to commit suicide? OahspeCollegeUniversity clearly shows you that these are coming from angels and spirits of the dead. Spirits of the dead and angels are the same thing. You could call them spirits, whatever you want to call them, ghost, whatever. But OahspeCollegeUniversity clearly shows you that it's actually spirits and angels from heaven that inspire humans to commit suicide. So I'm going to go to the OahspeCollegeUniversity for a minute and break this down using the OahspeCollegeUniversity for a minute. It's a sad story, but the truth of the matter is that this is where this thing is coming from. The book of Torah, chapter 6, verse 14. The book of Torah, chapter 6, verse 14. Verse 14. And except to the eyes, the light of Jehovah was shut out from men. The Ions were a group of humans that came about when angels came to have sex with the group of humans called Asu. Asu would be known as the Adamites. Now, the Ions came to our world about, if you're to calculate the timeline going backward using the year 1848, they came down to us, around 73,000 years ago. And that's when the Ions were created. But before that, the Asu was the beast man, the first group of humans called Adam. And the Ions came, and Ions will be equivalent of Abel. Now, let me just finish this verse. The book of Torah, chapter 6, verse 14. And except to the Ions, the light of Jehovah is the creator, was shut out from men. Those ambition for improvement was at the end. They become like drones and vagabonds. And when they died, their spirit continued to lie about in the places of their mortal life. In other words, what they're saying is when these humans die, they remain in the house where they live. And that's why you have a lot of stories about haunted houses. And many of the spirits persuaded mortals to suicide. You see that? Let me read that part again, that section. And when they died, their spirits continued to live about in the places of their mortal life. You see that? What this verse 14 is saying is that the spirit refused to leave the house. They continue to live in the house. They continue to live in the place of worship, in churches. There are verses showing this in the OahspeCollegeUniversity that, spirits die and they just go live in a church and stay there and have fun there. And many of the spirits persuaded mortals to suicide. You see that? And they killed themselves by thousands and tens of thousands. Nor was there any courage among men to enjoy anything under the sun. They wanted to be with the spirits of the dead, to talk with them, to see them, and to be rid of earthly trials. You see that? This book of Torah, chapter 6, verse 14 is telling you that spirits persuaded humans to commit suicide, inspired humans to commit suicide. The topic of discussion today is suicide. I'm showing you, I'm decoding, I'm using OahspeC to decode, to show you clearly that suicide came about by spirits, by angels, inspiring, telling humans to do so. This just don't fall out of anywhere. This is another bondage that is created by angels now. And for those of you who don't know who Thor is, in the book of from the OahspeC point of view, Thor is an Orion chief who created the concept of idols, and Thor came to our world to rule us for 3,200 years during the Ark Cycle, the 20th Ark Cycle, and he ruled our planet for 3,200 years, and he ruled us 15,000 years ago. So if you're to calculate the timeline using the Cosman timeline from the year, if you're to go backward using 1848, Thor ruled us 15,000 years, 400 years ago, and he ruled us from 15,400 years, 400 years all the way down to 12,200 years, and he ruled us for 3,200 years. And Thor came during the Ark of Moses, and he was an Orientist, introduced idols to us, or cemeteries of human beauty, and so on. Apollo also did the same thing, but Thor's focus was idols. And Thor is saying here in the book of chapter 6 that, this is how suicide came about. I'm going to go to the next chapter now to show you another verse, and so if you hear on the news or you hear that somebody died, committed suicide, you could tell right away, you tell right away that this came from spirits. This came from low graded. This came from Judas. Judas are angels of darkness. These are spirits. It's a spirit that inspired a human to do so. Now, funny thing is that if this was happening 15,000 years ago, and it's still happening, we're in the year 2019, and this is still ongoing. Spirits above us, spirit above us in Africa, in any part of the continent, in US, in United States, in the European country, people are dying every day. They're committing suicide. This is coming from angels, spirits who are doing this. I'm going to go to the next chapter to show you without a shadow of a doubt, where this is coming about. It's sad, but it's true. The book of Fragapeti, chapter 37, verse 39. I'm sorry, the book of Fragapeti, chapter 37, verse 3. Now, Fragapeti is my favorite book. And Fragapeti is an Orion chief who he came around 8,900 years ago, if you were to calculate from the year 1848, and this was the Ark Cycle of the 22nd Ark Cycle, and he ruled us for 3,100 years. Fragapeti is an Orion chief, and this is during the time of Zarathustra. So Zarathustra was introduced, the lawgiver, an Aisu called Zarathustra. They introduced Zarathustra around this time. And if, like I said, if you're to calculate it using the year 1848, this would be 8,900 years ago. And he ruled us from 8,900 years ago all the way down to 5,800 years using the year 1848. Because 1848 was when the new Ark Cycle started, the Cosman Cycle, the 25th Ark Cycle started in the year 1848. So if you to go backward, Fragapeti came around this time. Now, suicide was going on around that time too. Now, let me read from the book of Fragapeti, chapter 37, verse 3. 40 days, verse 3. 40 days he spent in this labor. And then the record was completed, of which Inchad had 2 copies made, one for his own kingdom in Etheria, one for the heaven he was about to found. According to these records, which are everlasting in heaven, the numerators estimated there were 1,800,000 spirits wandering about, most on the earth, many of them falling into forgetfulness and dissolution, and many of them have forgotten who they were. You see that? And had no memory of once having lived mortal lives. Millions and millions of them have forgotten their speech and were dumped. This is sad because this has to do because of the religion that people come about. Religion is making them the spirits like this. But if you've not watched my YouTube video, I encourage you to go watch it. It talks about a lot of stuff. This topic of discussion is just suicide, to show without a shadow of a doubt that it is angels and spirit that's inspiring humans to commit suicide. Millions of them lived with mortals as filters and familiars, depending for their own existence upon the spirit part of the food mortals drank and ate. You see that? This year, OahspeCollegeUniversity just disclosed something. Sometimes when you dream and you see yourself eating food or you drinking something, that's a spirit doing that. See, let me just read that again. Millions of them lived with mortals and as filters and familiars. I did a video about familiar spirits. You should go watch that. Depending for their own existence upon the spiritual part of the food mortals drank and ate, and yet other millions of them persuaded evil for evil's sake. You see that? Humans are inspired to commit evil, inspire mortals to war. You see that? This is how war came about. This is why people fight every time. It's spirits doing this for the delight of seeing them destroy one another. So this verse is saying that angels just wants to sit down and watch humans just kill each other just for the fun of it, delighting in persuading mortals to suicide or to all manners of wickedness. Let me read that part. Delighting in persuading mortals to suicide. You see that? This is what humans get from spirits. Spirits, angels are the one inspiring humans to commit suicide. You see, this is a prophet verse in the OahspeCollegeUniversity that talks about this. You see, and brothers and sisters, this wraps up the topic of today, that suicide came about from spirits, and it's sad. Brothers and sisters, get a copy of OahspeCollegeUniversity from Amazon and eBay. It's sad that spirits, low-graded spirits. Now, just to be clear, the angels of light do not inspire human to suicide. It's only angels of darkness. It's only low-graded angels, filters, familiar spirits, demon spirits that do this. Low-grade spirits who are low-grade, low in grade. Spirits who do not want resurrection are the ones doing this. This does not come from the angels of light. Brothers and sisters, if you have not subscribed to my YouTube video, I'm going to encourage you to do so. There are upcoming topics of discussion coming. The OahspeCollegeUniversity came about to inspire greater light that the King James